You know, we've been talking at this and to wrap up our answer plot TT30s for this fall before harvest really kicks in the swing. We decided that we better get out here and see what it really looks like in a soybean field. We would love to have a cornfield, but we're just getting cranked up. We're in southwest Iowa here. So Darren Roberts and I today are going to give you a little demonstration of how to do a field harvest loss with your growers. The most important part of this is doing this early in the season can save a lot of bushels. This is also an added sales call to your growers, and it's a good thing to do. We really appreciate it. Darren, what do you think on this?
So with our harvest loss demonstration that we're going to show you here, we kind of want to walk through the different sources of harvest loss out in the field. And what that comes down to is pre-harvest loss, header loss, and separator loss. And so we'll talk through each of those segments. We'll show you, we're out here, there's a couple combines running in the field, and we've got a demonstration set up to kind of walk you through each of those sources of harvest loss. And then we'll talk through about some of the adjustments that can be made to reduce that harvest loss.
One of the opportunities, and we've tried to express this TT30s, is short operational ability to get things out to the grower that you can take and be hands-on with. And this is one of those things to wrap up right before we kick off into the new seed selling season. Here in our harvest loss header demo, first of all though, when we really started, before we get to this bean one, let's address it if we were standing in a cornfield. Darren, if we were at a cornfield and we're going to look at header loss, what is our first thing that we would look at? Because instead of a head loss, we're going to look at field loss.
Yeah, so if we were in a cornfield, first thing we'd want to take a look at before assessing how the combine's doing, we'd want to get a feel for what pre-harvest loss is. The way we do that is by taking a look in 1/100th of an acre area and counting the number of ears that are on the ground. Okay, whether it be from environmental conditions or a particular hybrid that might drop ears, things like that. There's a number of different factors why we might have ears on the ground. But what we want to do is count those ears, and for an average size ear, we'd say that runs about 1 bushel per acre of yield loss. So first off, we're going to get a feel for pre-harvest loss if we were in a cornfield. And then next we'd come in here and take a look at our header loss.
Yeah, and when we're looking at header loss in this scenario, this is where we get into our foot-by-foot squares. So when we started doing that, we threw our squares out, and then we looked at and counted our number of lost kernels that are in that. And here we have soybeans. How many was in this, and what does that equate to?
Okay, so in this particular setup here behind us, we've got 3 1 foot by 1 foot squares out here, and we went and counted the beans. In 2 of those, we had roughly 4 beans in that 1 foot square, and in one of them we had about 8 or 9 beans. Okay, just a general rule of thumb for soybeans, for every 4 beans that you have in that square foot area, that equates to about 1 bushel per acre of yield loss. If we were in corn, all we need is 2 kernels per square foot, and that equates to 1 bushel per acre of yield loss.
And then we would also count how many extra ears were there above what the pre-harvest loss would be. And again, that would be equivalent to 1 bushel per acre loss for any additional ears that didn't make it through the combine head. Plus the two kernels would equal another bushel of yield loss.
Yep.
That's why setting your plates and doing things in the header pre-harvest and looking at things, this is a great demo to make sure we have our headers set. It doesn't matter if it's your corn rows, what is your stripper plates, or even how fast your reel and your drum speed is in these new, your headers on soybeans.
Yeah, one other thing to mention as far as trying to minimize this header loss is harvesting before the beans get too dry. When the beans get too dry, then we see more pod shatter, and we're losing more of those at the front end of the combine and not getting them into the machine.
This grower even commented this morning we had a heavy fog in southwest Iowa, and their header shatter of the day is way reduced because the beans have picked up moisture. These are testing 11%. So on that standpoint, we're probably here versus yesterday, we probably are seeing a reduced head shatter today. now that we've got through the header loss, pre-harvest loss, now we're going to talk about total harvest loss. Well, total harvest loss is really, we got to do some mathematical equation, and we got to talk about separator loss, plus add the header loss would be our total loss. So on that standpoint, separator loss is where we're at relatively, but it's a total harvest loss. In this scenario, with the beans threshing a little tougher today, and the combine set really well, we really didn't pick up anything greater than the header loss. But on that standpoint, if we did have a higher percentage of loss at this point, would be from the separator. What are some opportunities that you could do in combine settings to help reduce loss in the separator?
So as far as reducing that separator loss, there's a few different things that we could take a look at. One of the things would be our rotor speed, as well as our concave setting, that concave distance to the rotor. With that, we would refer you to the combine manufacturer manual. There's some guidelines on where we would start with that as far as rotor speed. In general, we'd start at the lower end of the rotor speed and kind of work our way up if we needed to, based on the manual guidelines. Okay. Other thing is concave setting. With that, based on our seed size and the crop we're harvesting, there's going to be a range of where we would set the concave distance. The other thing to take a look at would be the fan speed. And with that, we're going to have to adjust it based on if we're throwing seeds out the back or not. We're probably going to have to back off on the air to quit throwing some of the smaller seeds out the back end of the combine. Other thing to take a look at would be the sieve settings. Okay, and depending on our seed size, if we're dealing with a smaller seed, we're going to have to close those sieves down. And if we're dealing with a larger seed, you got to open the sieves up, and that'll help to capture more of the seed and separate it out from the chaff. Okay, so what we've got set up behind us here, this is our total combine loss that Darren was talking about. We went through, and in each of the squares, it was measuring roughly about a bushel. And so in this field, we're losing the majority of that from the header. Okay, we're not really adding on to that with additional separator loss.
You know, these are always great actions to do with your grower. I know this grower, he's probably was like, oh, I hope we aren't throwing a lot over. But on the other standpoint, this is an awesome opportunity to go out and do an added value step for your grower in a very crucial part, because this is where we actually put bushels to town, and this is the payday for our growers, and we all want to be standing there with them and making sure they're maximizing their profit. So this is why we wanted to end our TT30 series this year, before harvest and before we really get cranking up into seed sales, is how do we maximize our bushels, who are growers, so we have a greater return on investment.